My name is Ryan, and this happened during deer season in November of 2023. I live just outside Erie, Pennsylvania, and I've been hunting since I was 13. My dad got me into it, and after he passed away a few years ago, I started going alone more often. Hunting wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was the one place where everything else in life seemed to quiet down. That fall had been stressful. I had just started working as a diesel mechanic, and the long hours were wearing me out. I decided to take a Friday off and spend the weekend in Allegheny National Forest. I'd hunted parts of it before, but this time I wanted to explore an area farther east that I'd never been to. It wasn't popular because there were no marked trails leading into it, and most hunters avoided long hikes. That was exactly why I picked it. I left home around 4 in the morning. The drive took almost 3 hours, and I reached the gravel parking area just after sunrise. There were only 2 other trucks there. I recognized one from a local hunting forum because of a faded hunting club sticker on the rear window. The other looked old enough that it could have been sitting there for weeks. The air was cold enough that every breath came out white. There had been light rain the night before, so the ground was damp and quiet under my boots. I grabbed my backpack, rifle, binoculars, and started hiking. For the first hour, everything was exactly what I expected. The woods were calm. Squirrels were everywhere. Every now and then, I'd hear crows calling in the distance. I crossed a shallow creek, climbed a rocky hill, and eventually reached a clearing surrounded by tall oaks. It looked like the perfect place to sit for the afternoon. I found an old fallen log, leaned against it, and spent almost 2 hours watching the tree line. I spotted 3 does around noon, but they stayed well outside shooting range before disappearing into thicker woods. Around 1 o'clock, I decided to move farther north. The GPS app on my phone worked offline because I downloaded the area beforehand. I wasn't worried about getting lost. Every few hundred yards, I'd check my location just to stay on course. About 20 minutes later, I noticed something that made me stop. There was a tree stand attached to a large maple tree. At first, that wasn't strange. Hunters leave stands in public land all the time. What bothered me was how new it looked. The metal wasn't rusted. The straps looked recently tightened. Someone had even brushed leaves away from the base of the tree. I walked over to inspect it. There wasn't any name tag on it. Most hunters write their initials or license number somewhere because stands get stolen. This one had nothing. Just a ladder stand sitting about 15 feet up the tree. I looked around expecting to find fresh boot tracks, but the wet leaves only showed deer prints. I shrugged it off. Maybe whoever owned it had come in from another direction. I kept walking. About half an hour later, I found something else. Another stand. Same style. Same clean metal. No markings. This one faced the opposite direction. Now it felt odd. I'd hunted enough public land to know people usually spread out. These 2 stands were only a few hundred yards apart. I pulled out my phone and checked the map. Neither stand should have been there, according to the satellite images I'd looked at all week. I even zoomed in. Nothing. I remember laughing to myself. Guess the photos are old. Then I kept moving. The afternoon stayed quiet. By 4:30, the temperature had already started dropping. I hadn't seen another hunter all day, so I figured most people had gone home. I decided to head back before dark. That's when I heard the first whistle. It came from somewhere behind me, just one short whistle. Not a bird, not the wind, a person. I turned around. Nothing. The woods behind me were empty. I stood still for almost a minute. Silence. I figured another hunter had seen me walking and was trying to let me know he was nearby. It happens. Nobody wants someone accidentally walking into their shooting lane. I gave one quick whistle back. No answer. So I continued toward my truck. About 10 minutes later, I heard it again. Same whistle, same length. This time, it sounded closer. I stopped again. Still nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no movement. Only the sound of leaves blowing across the ground. I started walking faster. By now, the sun was dropping behind the hills, and the forest looked completely different than it had an hour earlier. The shadows stretched across the ground, making every fallen tree look like someone crouching. I kept checking behind me. Nothing. Eventually, I reached the creek I'd crossed earlier. As I stepped onto the rocks, I noticed fresh boot prints in the mud. They hadn't been there that morning. The tread was deep, like heavy hunting boots. They came out of the woods, stopped near the creek, then turned around and went back the same way. Whoever made them never crossed. They had just stood there, facing the direction I'd come from, watching. I looked across the water. The trees were packed so tightly I could barely see 20 yards in. Something moved between two trunks, just enough for me to catch it out of the corner of my eye. I lifted my binoculars. Nothing. I stayed there for another 30 seconds before convincing myself it had probably been a deer. I crossed the creek anyway. The parking lot was less than a mile away. I could make it before dark. The walk felt much longer than it had that morning. Every few minutes, I'd hear leaves crunch somewhere behind me. Whenever I stopped, the sound stopped too. At first, I blamed squirrels. Then I realized squirrels don't stop moving the exact second you do. I turned around suddenly. Empty woods. I was beginning to feel ridiculous. I even laughed at myself. "You're just tired." That explanation lasted maybe 5 minutes. Then I reached the last hill before the parking area. From the top, I should have been able to see my truck through the trees. Instead, I saw a man standing beside it. He wasn't touching it. He was just standing there, perfectly still, wearing full camouflage from head to toe. Even his face was covered with a camouflage mask. He wasn't looking at the truck. He was looking directly toward the trail, toward me. I froze. There was no reason for someone to stand like that. If he needed help, he would have waved. If he was another hunter leaving, he'd be loading gear. Instead, he simply stood there without moving, watching. And then, from somewhere much closer behind me, I heard that same single whistle one more time. The whistle was so close that I felt my stomach drop. It couldn't have been more than 30 or 40 yards behind me. I spun around with my rifle lowered, but ready. The trees were packed together, and the fading light made it hard to focus on anything farther than 20 yards. Nothing. Not a single person. No branches moving, no footsteps. Just silence. I turned back toward the parking area. The man beside my truck hadn't moved. He was still facing me. For a second, I considered yelling, but something about the situation stopped me. If he was harmless, shouting would only make things awkward. If he wasn't, I didn't want him knowing I was scared. I took a slow step downhill, then another. The man stayed exactly where he was. When I got close enough to make out more details, I noticed he wasn't carrying a rifle. That was unusual during deer season. Most hunters don't leave camp without one. He had a small backpack, gloves, and a camouflage jacket, but his hands hung at his sides. I was maybe 100 yards away when he finally moved. He stepped behind my truck. I kept walking, expecting him to come back into view. He never did. I picked up my pace. By the time I reached the parking lot, he was gone. I checked around the truck. Nothing. No footprints on the gravel. No vehicle I hadn't seen that morning. The only other trucks were still parked where they'd been when I arrived. I unlocked my driver's door without taking my eyes off the woods. The whole time, I had the feeling someone was standing just beyond the trees, watching. I climbed inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. As soon as the headlights came on, they lit up the tree line. No one. I let out a nervous laugh. Maybe I'd imagined half of it. Maybe the guy had simply walked away while I was coming down the hill. I put the truck in reverse. Then my headlights swept across the edge of the parking lot. There was another ladder stand, lying flat in the weeds. It hadn't been there that morning. I was positive. I drove over for a closer look, but stayed inside the truck. It looked identical to the two I'd seen deeper in the forest. Clean metal, fresh straps, no identifying marks. Just before I pulled away, I noticed something hanging from one of the steps. A strip of bright orange survey tape. It fluttered in the wind. Written on it with a black marker were 3 words: "Not your stand." I stared at it for several seconds. Then I left. The nearest state police barracks was about 40 minutes away, but I stopped at a small gas station first because I wanted another person around before I processed what had happened. The cashier noticed I looked shaken and asked if I was okay. I told him I'd seen someone acting strangely in the forest. Before I even finished, he nodded. "You hunting up on the east side?" I asked how he knew. He shrugged. "You're not the first one." That got my attention. He said over the past couple of years, several hunters had come in with similar stories. Someone whistling from the woods. Tree stands appearing where they hadn't been before. A man in camouflage watching people from a distance. None of them had actually been attacked, but every one of them left early. I asked if anyone had reported it. He said they had. Game wardens searched the area a few times, but never found anything unusual. No illegal camp, no abandoned cabin, nothing. I still reported everything to the state police before driving home. The officer took my statement seriously enough to write it down, but he admitted there wasn't much they could investigate without a crime. A week later, curiosity got the better of me. I drove back, not alone this time. My friend Eric came with me. I didn't tell him every detail because I didn't want him thinking I'd lost my mind. I just said I wanted to check something. We followed the exact route I'd taken the week before. The first tree stand was gone. The second one was gone too. There wasn't even an impression in the leaves where the ladders had rested. It was like they'd never existed. Eric laughed when I pointed out the trees. "You sure you didn't get turned around?" "I know where I was." We searched for almost an hour. Nothing. Then Eric stopped walking. "Do you hear that?" I listened. At first, I heard only the wind. Then, a whistle. One short whistle. Exactly the same as before. Eric looked at me. "You hear that?" I nodded. Neither of us answered it. We started back toward the truck. About halfway there, Eric suddenly grabbed my arm. "Don't look right away." "What?" "Someone's behind us." I felt every muscle in my body tighten. We kept walking another 20 yards before turning together. A man stood between 2 trees, far enough away that we couldn't make out his face. Close enough to know he was watching us. He wore full camouflage. He didn't move. He didn't wave. He just stood there. Eric whispered, "Let's go." We turned around and walked faster. Neither of us ran. Running felt like the worst thing we could do. After several minutes, we reached the parking lot. The man never came out of the woods. We left without saying much. A few days later, Eric called me. He'd been looking through photos he'd taken during the hike. Most of them were ordinary pictures of the forest. Then he zoomed in on one. At first, I didn't notice anything. Then I saw it. In the background, partially hidden behind a thick oak tree, was the same man. The picture had been taken almost an hour before either of us heard the whistle, which meant he'd been following us long before we realized we weren't alone. Eric deleted the photo after showing it to me. He said keeping it made him uncomfortable. I wish he'd sent me a copy first. I've hunted plenty of places since then, but never that section of Allegheny National Forest again. Maybe it was one disturbed man protecting territory he believed belonged to him. Maybe there were others helping him. I honestly don't know. What still bothers me isn't the whistling. It isn't the man standing beside my truck. It's the fact that someone was carrying heavy ladder stands miles into public land, setting them up without leaving a single trace behind, and somehow disappearing every time someone came looking. If you ever find a tree stand deep in the woods that looks too new, has no name on it, and doesn't seem to belong there, keep walking. Somebody may already be watching from a place you'll never think to look.